What's going on, guys? This is Austin with Tactical Approach Outdoors. Today we're going to talk about the October lull, what it is and how to hunt it, so stay tuned. So in order to be successful during the October lull, we really need to understand what's going on. It's not very different to the early season. It's actually very similar. The deer are still on a bed to food pattern. The only difference is they're not quite as easy to find. Their bed to food pattern has now shifted to the woods. They're on those acorns you're seeing starting to drop all September, and they're in that high stem count bedding. Now that the velvet is off their antlers, it doesn't hurt their antlers to walk through that stuff anymore. So their bedding is not in the open anymore, or in the fields. They weren't really in the open anyways, but in the fields or in the big timber where there's not a lot of underbrush, where they can hit their antlers when they're walking by. They're in those fall grounds now. They have shifted back. So that thick bedding and the acorn trees, that's now where their bedding to food pattern is, rather than being on the fields. And that's why most people don't really like the October lull, and it makes it more difficult to hunt in a way, just because you can't glass those deer from a distance and actually see where they're at. Those deer are tucked in the woods, they're tucked into the thick stuff, and that makes it a little bit more difficult to hunt, but it doesn't make it impossible. So let's talk about how we can hunt it now. Alright, so now that we have a better understanding about what the October lull actually is, now let's talk about how we can go about locating that buck and then hunting him, so we don't ruin our rut that's coming up. So the main thing we're going to look for is we're going to look for that secluded bedding and that secluded food sources, just like we did early season, but now we're going to shift it to the woods. We're going to shift it to those mast trees, those big white oaks especially. We love finding those big white oaks. They tend to be a little bit more sporadic, so they tend to be a draw. That's what we're looking for. They'll feed on those red oaks leading into those big white oaks in the ridges. For hunting river bottom property, we really like finding pin oaks, because those pin oaks tend to be a little bit more sporadic, where you're going to find a lot of cottonwoods and sycamores in those river bottoms. If you can find those big oaks that are producing, you're in the ball game. And make sure those oaks at the same time have some kind of adjacent cover close by, bedding area right there next to it. If you can find a white oak kind of right on the edge, or an oak period, right on the edge of that bedding, you're going to be in ball game. Uncut corn, it's a fantastic place to look right now. You've got a small time period right now where maybe the corn in your area isn't cut yet. That provides a ton of cover for these deer, so that they'll use the edges. They'll start leaving scrapes on the edges of that uncut corn. They're going to get back just inside the tree line where those oak trees are. This is a spot that really is only good for maybe a couple weeks here, just because people are going to start getting to it. Because once that corn is cut, you lose a lot of cover off of that field. People can access it easier, and these deer also don't feel quite as safe, so they're going to shift back to some other spots that are a little bit further away from the field, give them a little bit of a buffer from hunting pressure and so forth. So find that secluded cover, find that secluded food source adjacent to the cover, and make sure there's water somewhat close. Now, I'm not too concerned here in the Midwest with hunting water, that we have a lot of water, so usually that's not a limiting factor for us, but those deer still need it. So make sure it's fairly close, especially now that it's still kind of warm out. We need some kind of pond or a little creek or something fairly close to that bedding area and food source. I like finding that. It tends to be a really good draw. So find your hot sign, look for tracks, and now they're also going to start opening up some scrapes, which is fantastic. Now those scrapes get really good in pre-rut, obviously, right? That's something we really focus on. But those scrapes right now, with a core buck, he's going to start using those scrapes on a fairly regular basis. They're starting to figure out who goes where, kind of in a way. So their core areas and what buck, especially that dominant buck for that spot, he's been there for a couple years, he's going to start leaving his mark. So find the fresh sign and go to it, but go to it very strategically, okay? This is when most people ruin their pre-rut and their rut, is because they overhunt the October lull in these particular locations, okay? Bounce around a lot, have multiple locations, and be unpredictable. Even hunt totally different properties. I mean, just be very careful about what kind of pressure you put out there. Hunt the cold fronts primarily. Your high odds hunts. That way, because where they're bedding right now and they're feeding right now is, if you're smart, will also be where they're going to have their main pre-rut activity. So it's a balancing act right now, making sure you don't overhunt it, but that you're aggressive enough and you're strategic enough to actually get in there and maybe get yourself a deer before the pre-rut even starts. So we love this time of year. It's a fun time of year to hunt, and it's a very similar to the early season hunt, but like I said earlier, you just can't spot them from a long distance away because they're in the thick stuff now. So thanks for watching. I hope you liked the video. Please hit that like and subscribe button to follow along for all the rest of our other content, and I will see you on the next video.